Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the National Career Development Association, welcome to today's NCDA webinar series. We are pleased that you have all joined us. Before we get started, I want to share some technical information with you. During the webinar, please keep your microphone muted and your camera turned off. We encourage any questions to be typed into the chat section, which can be found on the lower section of your screen. Our presenter and panelists will address those questions at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording link will be available on the NCDA website next week, as well as emailed to everybody that has registered. Individuals who have signed up for this webinar will be able to log into their accounts on the NCDA website to view their CE transcripts beginning next week. This program is approved for 1 contact hour of continuing education. If you have any questions about continuing education, you can contact myself, Alicia Cheek, at NCDA headquarters. I will now turn it over to Dr. Nancy Arthur to introduce our panelists.
Hello, and welcome to the NCDA IUBG joint webinar, 3 Perspectives on Theory, Research, Practice, Connections. My name is Nancy Arthur, and I'm joining you today from the University of South Australia in Adelaide. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the traditional lands of the Ghana people and pay respects to Indigenous and Aboriginal people in this area and throughout the locations where you may be living or working today. I'm joining you today in my capacity as a board member of IUVG, and I want to thank NCDA for managing the registration for the webinar. I want to offer a warm welcome to colleagues from many different countries and time zones who are joining us this morning. Our panelists are Dr. Seth Hayden, Dr. José Domene, and Dr. Sheu, whose bios were included in the descriptions of the webinar, so I would ask you to refer to those bios. I invited these panelists for this topic because of their chapter contributions in 2 books, Contemporary Theories of Career Development, International Perspectives, and also Career Theories and Models at Work, Ideas for Practice, in which they wrote with colleagues about specific theoretical orientations and their applications in practice. I've asked each of the panelists to highlight 1 theory, discuss some new developments, and provide insights about how research informs ideas for practice. Each will have 5-minute segments, so we'll move through the information with highlights and snapshots. Please use the chat function on Zoom to post comments and questions, and we'll have a few minutes to review those questions and comments at the end. So we won't take any longer for introduction. Let's get into the main part of the webinar. So we'll begin with Dr. Hayden, followed by Dr. Domene, and then Dr. Sheu. So I'll begin with you, Dr. Hayden. If you could give us an overview about what is unique about social cognitive career theory. You have 5 minutes.
Nancy, that's me. I think it's on a different theory.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so Hayden, you're starting then. Is that right?
I think they studied CIP.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
It's okay. We just mixed up the order. That's fine. If you're ready to go, Hayden, let's start with you, okay?
Oh, okay. All right. Are you guys looking at the?
No, it was on for a minute, Hayden, and then went off. That's all right. We'll just give you a minute to reset it.
Let me share this. Are you looking at the PowerPoint slide now? Okay.
All right, there we go. Okay, so Dr. Sheu is going to start today, and again, just to repeat, so an overview of what are the unique features of social cognitive career theory. Thank you.
Okay, great. Right, the theory is social cognitive career theories, and I just have a couple of slides to share with this group. Now, the theory is based on Bandura's idea about human agency, which operate in within interdependent structures that include three components, and that's why it's called triadic reciprocal causations. And those three components include person factors, which is internal, our cognition, biologies, affective variables. They include behaviors, and they include external environmental factors. And the idea is that those three components, they are both cause and effect of each other, and they influence each other reciprocally. And we would talk about how this can be applied within the context of career development and choice. Okay. And that's where the theory of social cognitive career theory come in to apply the ideas to career choice and development. I do want to emphasize here these slides. I will present an oversimplified view of career social cognitive career theories, because the whole theory actually have 5 different models, and I want to take out the next 3 hours to talk about it. So I'm just gonna simplify in a way that hopefully is easier to absorb in this webinar. The theory was proposed to predict sort of 5 different career-related outcomes. One is about how interests were developed, and then the second model is related to career choice making. For example, how do one decide to enter into STEM field, science, engineering majors or occupations? And the third model is proposed to predict performance and persistence. Once a person enter a particular career direction path, occupations, how do they perform in their career or their majors, and whether they persist in that career path. And the fourth model was proposed to predict well-being and satisfaction within that career domain. How satisfied they are with the occupation that they currently reside, for example, how students are after they enter into science engineering majors, for example. And the more recent model was proposed to explain the career exploration process and the job search process. And I have an empirical example. I would touch upon that later on in this webinars. So those are the different career outcomes the SCCT was supposed to predict and explain. And environmental factors is part of the theory that typically involves supports and barriers. Person input that little box include a lot of things: your demographic variables, your predispositions, including personality traits, affective variables, sexual orientations is also typically included in here in this box. Prior learning experience, we also know that they have a significant impact on our career development choice. And most importantly, the theory proposed the social cognitive variables as a key mediators. And that 2 signature variables include self-efficacy and outcome expectations. So this is an oversimplified version of the theory, basically highlight the importance of the 2 social cognitive variables in their utility in directly predicting those career outcomes, and also carry the effect of prior learning experience, your environmental supports and barriers, and other person's input. The outcomes, if you look at this developmentally and longitudinally, then those outcomes will then later become the prior learning experience, and then they will shape a person's self-efficacy and outcome expectations. Okay. All right, is it 5 minutes? I'm not checking time, so that's a very simplified view. And then that I said that we follow Nancy's instruction, and I have an example to show you how they came out in the empirical research.
Thank you so much, Hayden, for that overview. And I know there's not time to go thoroughly into the theories, but hopefully it will give people some key points and they can follow up with looking at other resources. I'm going to go over to you now, Dr. Domene, for your presentation, please.
All right, can everybody see the slides? Great. So before we begin, I do want to mention that I'm located at University of Calgary, which is traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. I just wanted to acknowledge that here in Canada. At any rate, I will be talking a little bit about Young and colleagues, contextual action theory. I'm fortunate enough to have been one of those colleagues. And for now, let's talk about some of the things that make contextual action theory distinct. If I can. All right. So first of all, this is just a brief highlights of some of the distinctives. I do encourage you to go to the readings. The book that Nancy had talked about at the beginning would be an excellent primer. At any rate, contextual action theory is a theory of career that emphasizes human action in daily life. There are, the theory proposes multiple perspectives on action, which I could spend the next 5 minutes just talking about the perspectives on action, but I'm not going to. I'm going to move right along to another distinctive of the theory, which is that it is teleological. In other words, contextual action theory does not emphasize or focus on characteristics or past events that predict or lead to a person's action or career development in the present, but instead we focus on how action, a variety of various kinds of action, but including those towards career development, are driven by a person's goals for the future. So when you think about contextual action theory, we'll talk about context in a second, but action and goals are at the center of the theory. So we don't have, compared to other theories, we don't place as much emphasis on mapping out specific influences of a range of variables. Instead, we look at how people engage in action, how people construct goals, how people engage in action to pursue those goals. And the contextual part of contextual action theory, our theory is a relational theory of career. So we're really looking at the social context in which career development happens, in which actions occur. Our theory proposes that in everyday life, people tend to pursue their goals and engage in actions in conjunction with other people. It is relatively rare that somebody will pursue their career in an isolated, individual way without considering family, friends, co-workers, etc. So contextual action theory does focus on relational aspects of career. And therefore, when we are talking about actions, we tend to explore and emphasize the joint actions that people take together. So this can involve the joint actions that a career counselor and a client take together, although most of our research has focused more on, let's say, if we're researching young people, it would be parents and youth working together to pursue goals towards the youth's future career, or some of my work, how couples negotiate together an idea for the future and pursue that. And finally, I wanted to mention that contextual action theory also does propose a particular system of action. So a temporal system of action. So when we talk about actions, we're talking about short-term things that can happen in seconds or minutes that are motivated by the immediate circumstances. When actions coalesce together, so when there are multiple actions towards a common goal that occurs over a mid-term amount of time, so typically weeks, perhaps months, we can conceptualize those goals as reflecting projects. Projects are important in terms of career counseling because typically we would work with clients around developing what kind of career development projects are they seeking to pursue over the next few weeks and months. And finally, over a lifetime, these projects may coalesce around things that we refer to as careers. So in this conceptualization of career can encompass many more things than occupation and work. So my career might be that of being a good spouse or being a parent, raising a family, etc. Although I will say, for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to be using career in its more traditional sense, meaning work and occupation. That is not always the case in the literature, and I believe that's my 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Domene. So over to you, please, Dr. Hayden, for your theory orientation. Okay, just hit your unmute button there, Seth, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I appreciate it. And very interesting. My previous panelists have piqued my interest in your theories, which was already there. But thank you for sharing your thoughts. And so I'm going to be talking about cognitive information processing theory. So I'm Seth Hayden. I'm an associate professor of counseling at Wake Forest University in the United States. And I am a part of a community of practice that focuses on cognitive information processing theory. And I want to acknowledge the other members of the community of practice and how I share this information with the understanding that this is a cumulative effort by many to come up with this and to consider aspects of career development. And so a couple of features of cognitive information processing theory. First of all, is cognitive behavioral nature. So there's this consideration of the thoughts and feelings that are associated with career development. We focus on career problem solving and decision-making process. And so within career, there is an aspect of trying to navigate a problem and make a decision. And so we focus a lot on that. We also look at readiness. So when we think about how it is we can best serve somebody, we have to determine what is their degree of readiness in relation to their career development. And so we try to adapt interventions based on that. We also try to expand knowledge of self, options, and decision-making. And we also try to empower clients to effectively engage in career problem-solving and decision-making. What we know about career development, it is a lifelong process. And so while we have something we're focusing on in the moment, we recognize that this is going to happen again. And so one of the aspects of CIP that I think is distinct is that it's really focused on the learning engagement between the practitioner and the one receiving support. So when we're using this theory, we're going to talk about the theory. We're going to show them some of the things I'm about to show you, and try to help people become empowered to be able to effectively navigate this both now and into the future.
Seth, I think you hit your speaker again.
Sorry about that. Yeah, start clicking buttons, you never know what's going to happen. So sorry. So this is the knowing of a career decision. These are the domains of knowing. And so you see that has practitioner version here, because this would be something that people that have the technical knowledge of the approach might focus on. And you see these different domains. So there's knowledge of self, knowledge of options, how one makes decisions, and then the messaging, the self-talk, the awareness, how one monitors and kind of controls their navigation through the process. You have that at the top of the pyramid with metacognitions. And then we have the client version. So this is what the client would receive. So again, I'm going to be sharing this with them, and we're going to be developing this information together. And so this is the knowing. And then this is the doing. This is the Kasabi cycle. And so once we realize that there is something that we need to tend to, there's a concern that has been presented, we have to think about what's our process of navigating this concern. And so again, this is the practitioner version. This has a lot of technical language here, but essentially it's recognizing there's a concern. We're going to engage in some analysis, think about what are our options, do some prioritization of that. And then at some point, we're going to need to implement a choice. And then here's the client version. Again, something that I'm going to share openly with someone I'm working with, that this is how we're going to do this. And then monitor our progress as we move through it. And then I want to go back to this sense of readiness, because this is really important. So we don't just give everybody the same, because we feel it's important to right size the approach. Because what we know is that career services is a scarce resource, that there are a lot more people who need help than there are those who can provide it. And so if we give everybody the same, then there are going to be some who get too much and then some who don't get enough. And so we do some element of assessing their degree of readiness to try and right size the approach. And so there's the complexity and capability elements here that we use to analyze specifically what degree of support does this person need. And so I'll talk a little bit more, I think, later on about how we assess for that. But yes, these are some things to think about. So again, there's that dimension of readiness that's critically important to the approach, and the differentiated service delivery model. So you see these components of individual case managed, brief staff assisted, and then also the self-help model. Those are aspects of the differentiated service delivery model. So I believe that is my 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's terrific. Seth, we might stay with you and for the next part of the presentation. So in this second round, I asked panelists to provide examples of recent research based on the theory. So we're curious, what's new and what evidence have you found to inform career practice?
Sure, absolutely. So there's one of the things that CIP really focuses on is that integration of theory, practice, and research. And so there's been 30 years of history of trying to consider those things. And so when I shared some of those components previously, there's a lot of research that is informed into that. And so I'll give a quick example of how it is we can determine the effectiveness of some of the aspects of the approach. One is this brief assisted model. So this goes back to that right sizing of the approach. So the brief assisted model is about a 20 to 30 minute engagement with a career practitioner that's got the CIP components that I discussed earlier involved. And so we were curious about, does this work? Does this brief engagement that's theoretically based have some impact? And this thought of the connection between career development and mental health was also something that we were curious about. And we found some interesting outcomes. And so as you see here, in terms of knowledge of next steps, there seemed to be a degree of, there was neither a regression or a positive outcome, but there was also a fair proportion that had a positive outcome. They had an increase in their knowledge of next steps. We looked at confidence. So that's a kind of a mental health dimension, one's feeling about where they are. And so again, we saw that people in that 20 to 30 minute engagement at least stayed the same, but actually there were some who had an increase in their confidence. And then we looked at anxiety because we were curious about, again, that connection between career development and mental health. What kind of impact does this career-focused engagement have on aspects of mental health? And so we assessed for anxiety, and we found that, again, did not increase anxiety for the most part, at least stayed the same, but actually was found for a reasonable portion of the people who participated to reduce anxiety. So when we think about the CIP-focused approach, the different components that I've mentioned, and that connection between career development and mental health, we looked at an aspect of the differentiated service delivery model and found that it had benefits in career elements, but also in mental health dimensions. So that's just something I thought I would share.
That's a great snapshot of research and evidence that supports particular practice modalities. Seth, and I know that the panelists are not able to present the extensive research that has been done associated with each of the theories, but we thought we would offer a snapshot of how evidence might be used to inform practice. Hangbin, I'm going to go back to you now. Can you provide an example of recent research on the theory that you'd like to share with us today? Just unmute yourself there, Hayden. Thank you.
All right, let's start this again.
That's all right. Just take your time.
Yep. All right, let me pick it up from here. That's the overall theories and a research that I want to share with this webinar is to demonstrate longitudinally. In other words, we track people across 5 time points and see how the personality variables predict self-efficacy, because self-efficacy is a key variables in the theories, and how self-efficacy then predict exploratory behaviors and then career decidedness. All right, this is the longitudinal study that we recently completed, and they have the variable of career decision self-efficacy, which is very popular variables in the literature, and career exploratory behaviors. In other words, how much students engage in activities related to career explorations. And the outcome that we want to predict is how decided they are about their college majors. Those are exploratory students. In other words, they enter the college without choosing a major. They are still in the exploration process. This is a sort of an overall finding that the extroversion and emotional stability, those are 2 personality traits that we know have some relationship with career decidedness. And CDAC, this is the career decision self-efficacy. In other words, how confident they are in activities related to career decision makings. And CEB is how much they engage in career exploratory behaviors. And the outcome is how decided they are with choosing the majors. And you will see here T1, that's time 1, and T5, that's time 5, that's at the end of this process. And T1 to T5, that's across 10 weeks. Okay. So right here, basically the overall finding is that career decision self-efficacy and career exploratory behaviors mediate the effect of personality trait on career decidedness. So this part is consistent with the theoretical model that I just presented in the previous slides. And again, this is a longitudinal, so it can only go in this direction. It cannot be reversed. That's one thing that we usually try to find out in empirical research, is to demonstrate that temporal relations, what happened first, what happened next, and what's the temporal outcome at the end. Okay. So from this overall finding, we demonstrate the importance of career decision-making self-efficacy and exploratory behaviors. The next part of this project is then to look at whether one person's self-efficacy at one time point, the change in self-efficacy at one time point actually facilitate their engagement in career exploration in the next time point or not. Because that's actually quite important in terms of practice, because you want to demonstrate the effect of your career interventions. You want to see whether you intervened in something this week, whether they cause any or lead to any difference in next week. So here is the within person analysis. And again, we look at the relationship between career decision self-efficacy and exploratory behaviors, how they relate to each other over time across 5 time points. I'm just gonna skip all the statistical analysis because we don't have time on that. But what this results show is that starting at time 2, if we intervened to improve a student's career decision self-efficacy, then time 3, which is 2 weeks after, there's also increased their engagement in career exploratory behaviors. And at time 3, if they engage more in exploratory behaviors, at time 4, their confidence would improve further. Okay. And again, at the very end, the decision-making efficacy and exploratory behaviors, they have a bidirectional relationship. In other words, they are both temporal precedents, antecedent, and outcome of each other's. In terms of how this can be applied in practice, I just want to highlight one thing. Basically, what this means is that whether the career intervention should focus on improving confidence or encouraging engagements, encourage career exploratory behaviors, depends on when. Okay. So in this case, if you're at time 2, which is about 2 weeks into a semester, then that intervention should focus on building confidence. And if you're talking about 5 weeks into the semester, then intervention should focus on engagement in career exploratory behaviors. Okay, so I think this is critically, relevant in terms of how you structure your career interventions to improve these 2 key variables that's as demonstrated right up here. Those are 2 important mediators that predict career decidedness directly and also carry the effect of the 2 personalities on career decidedness. And the within-person analysis that shows that across this 10-week span, if we were to intervene, what we should intervene depends on where we are in this 10-week process. This research has more than this. We also break it down by gender and by race, ethnicity. As a potential moderator, so they tell us if you're working with male versus female students, working with students of the majority versus minority group, how we should modify our intervention based on empirical findings. Okay. So this is just a quick overview of how we can test the theory and how the empirical findings offer useful information in designing and structuring career interventions. Okay.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that example. Again, now, José, Domene, you're next. Would you like to just tell us, give us an example of some of the recent research you've been engaged with pertaining to contextual action theory?
Absolutely. You can see the screen?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Great. So over the last couple of decades, most of the existing research on contextual action theory has really focused on the nature of action, the relationships between action and goals, etc., which has led to a valid critique that our theory may be useful for explaining career development, but is less useful for practice. So over the last 7 years or so, we've really been trying to address that concern and focusing on developing principles of practice that emerge from our theory. And most recently, just a couple of months ago, we published a article. I think it's in Counseling Psychology Quarterly. I can send out the reference though. Anyway, in which we developed a brief supportive counseling intervention, which I'll talk about in the next segment, and looked at its usefulness for helping young adult newcomers to Canada make the transition into Canada, including transition to Canadian work settings. So the qualitative findings really emphasized a couple of things. One is that we saw more variability than commonality in terms of the degree of certainty and flexibility that different participants had with entry into the Canadian workforce, which does make sense. And the other key qualitative finding related to career was that their involvement in the intervention was perceived by them to be useful in helping them to shift from exploring and trying to figure out who they were, what's going on, to implementation. So helping them to formulate goals related to future work, helping them to pursue those goals, both both in terms of individuals with counselors and also in terms of pairs of people working together, whether that be couples or siblings or friends working together to pursue those goals. And the qualitative findings indicated that participants were able to make that shift from exploration to implementation. As part of that study, we're actually currently preparing, so this is cutting edge, still in the middle of writing it, a manuscript highlighting both the qualitative and quantitative components of the intervention. Qualitatively, specific perceptions about the benefits of the program. What is it about the program that is useful? And just a couple of highlights include the fact that touching base over time. So the intervention took place over a 6-month period. Most of the time was brief telephone contacts. So just being accountable to someone. Another qualitative finding was working with a counselor or a significant other person in the person's life to help discuss and formulate goals was perceived to be more useful than what individuals were trying to do on their own. In addition to that, we did track progress on a range of variables over time. And Seth, I thought it was interesting you mentioned the connections with mental health, because one of our quantitative indicators was the outcome rating scale, which is a measure of overall well-being. And we conducted a hierarchical linear modeling analysis to look at change over time and revealed that that improved, as well as we had a measure of community engagement, which makes sense given the nature that the participants were people transitioning into Canada. And that also improved over time from our qualitative findings, which I will not share with you right now because we haven't published it yet. And that takes me to my 5 minutes, I believe.
Okay, so Jose, I may stay with you then for the sort of third round of brief presentations here, because I think you've started to talk about the practice implications. So in this third round, I'm asking each of the panelists, what are the key messages or takeaway points for practitioners, stemming from the theory, stemming from latest research? What, if you have a few highlights that you'd really like to share with the audience today. Thank you. Yes,
I would like to share two highlights. One, I want to elaborate a little bit more on the intervention that we're developing. So it's an intervention that's grounded in contextual action theory and conceptualized as 3 meetings over 6 months, and then a series of touching base with participants over that time. So in the first meeting, especially if we're working with pairs of participants, like a couple, a parent and a child, etc., the meeting does involve having the clients discuss together their goals, their situation, their goals, and then recording that and using that video recording to help clients to reflect on what is going on for them in a way that they may not over time. Then drawing on some narrative therapy interventions in terms of, there's a parallel to writing therapeutic letters to clients. But anyway, then in this, we do a brief kind of review or analysis of what's going on in the first meeting, present our understanding of what is occurring for the clients in the second meeting, and discuss with them goals that we see them as pursuing and that they'd like to pursue over the next several months. In this case, it was, I think it was actually 3 months. Different studies have varied in terms of the length of time. Then we would touch base with them, say, briefly with telephone conversations to just touch base on their progress over that period of time. It might be twice a month, it might be monthly, again, depending on the study. And then a final sort of in-person meeting with the clients to evaluate with them the progress they've made on those goals. So it's relatively brief in terms of the number of sessions, and we do harness or use technology both in terms of video and in terms of telephone contact. So that's the nature of the intervention. I would encourage us to consider the use of, especially, we've been through 2 years of COVID related technology adoption and touching base in ways other than face-to-face. I would encourage everyone here to think about how we may be able to leverage those technologies to work with clients in perhaps a less traditional 15-minute session in a room with them way. And the other takeaway that I really want to ask you to consider is how might you involve the important people in a client's life in career counseling with them. My cultural background is Chinese and Mexican. The idea that we would meet with the person without considering family and other people in a person's life is actually a little bit odd to me. Although I accept that it's the norm, at least in Canada, I assume in the US, but I would like to challenge that norm and have you think about involving other important people. And related to contextual action theory specifically, how might the other important people in a client's life facilitate the co-construction of goals for the future, might facilitate how a person might understand themselves in their situation. So involving folks, family, other important people in that process of understanding what's going on. And then, of course, how might we leverage these important people in terms of helping clients engage in joint actions? So helping clients do things in pursuit of their goals. Again, it's relatively rare that somebody would pursue their career solely on their own. Often there are other important people in the person's life that are there alongside them, that may have to be negotiated with, or that we're able to work together with to pursue those goals. And so consider the joint actions and ultimately, what is the role of these other people, and how could we leverage that to help our clients achieve their goals? So those are the important points that I would like us to consider for practice.
Thanks very much, José, for those great ideas for practice. Seth, I'm going to go over to you now to ask that sort of same question around, what are the key messages or takeaway points for practitioners that you'd like to offer today?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. I appreciate it. And I mean, a couple of things similar to José in terms of just keep it brief, but I would say that that thought of CIP being a learning engagement, and it's simple. It's designed to live in one's working memory. So when I'm there as the practitioner and I'm trying to engage with somebody around what's going on, and I'm using the theory to inform that engagement, I can recall the components of the approach as I'm talking with them, so I can readily access. I don't have to get out the book. I can think about that and share that with them. And the hope is that they can replicate that as they move forward. And also to use evidence to inform that engagement. So at that intersection of theory, research, and practice, I really think when interventions are at their best, those things are happening, that you have all these different components that are coalescing. And so I think CIP continually focuses on that. The research example I shared was about what does it look like in practice? So when we use a CIP-based intervention, does it work or does it not? And so I would encourage you to think about that for yourself, and how do these things come together? And then how do we evaluate its use? And so those are some things related to CIP that I think are important. And again, I go back to this thought of trying to be adaptable. So as people are coming in, I showed the pyramid and the Kasave cycle, but each person's pyramid is their own. And each person's Kasave cycle is their own. And so we're going to use what people share with us to inform those things and develop them together and come up with ways in which we can navigate this and hopefully, again, enhance their sense of agency. And in the last couple of years, as we've sensed, there's been so many things that have impacted people's sense of agency, especially around career. There are conditions that have inhibited their ability to be able to feel as if they can fully move forward and make decisions. And careers have changed incredibly over the last couple of years based on something beyond people's control. And so how do we enhance their agency? There was a quick question here, Kasave cycle or components of the cycle. So it's communication, analysis, synthesis, value, and execution. And so I'm happy to share some more information with you. Also that we want to share the approach. I would say that's another element. quickly, I'll end with this because I want to make sure a colleague has a chance to share, but we have a lot of information that we are willing to freely share with the community because we are more interested in people having good information to best help people than we are trying to be too proprietary in the information. And so I'm happy to put in the chat a link to the tech center that is that community of practice I referenced that has a lot of resources and a bibliography and so on. So there's a couple things that come to mind.
Great, thank you so much, Seth. Now, Hanbin, you're our third person to reply to this question. What are the key messages, takeaway points for practitioners from your theoretical perspective?
All right, it's one slice, put a few bullet points on that, so let me share that. Okay. All right. Some of them actually overlap with my peer presenters here. So I start to see some overlap between different theories. That's a good thing. From a social cognitive point of view, I would offer a few suggestions based on the empirical findings that we have accumulated so far. I have to say that this is a relatively large literature. CIP is also huge, actually. Accumulated more than 2 decades of empirical evidence and social cognitive theories. Actually, right before pandemic 2019, we presented APA to celebrate its 25th year anniversary. So there's a lot of empirical evidence has been accumulated. So this is based on meta-analysis, experimental designs. I'm gonna provide a few highlights here in terms of its practical implications. The first one is to identify career concerns. The model include a lot of variables, and each of them could be a focus of career intervention, but not every client need all of them. I think that's connected to what Seth was mentioned early on in terms of the priorities, how you prioritize your client. And some of the clients need more assistance. Other clients, they may just need some career informations and or career decision-making process that says share, then they can just take it on their own. So I think the career assessments and career information, those are crucial at the beginnings. If the career counselor decided the SCCT is a useful framework in interventions, then we can look more closely into each component of the theory. For example, to help our client develop self-efficacy or competence that match their skills, ability levels, and also in the area of their interest. Given the crucial role that these variables play in the theories, help the client clarify their values and from there develop positive outcome expectations. In other words, if they pursue this career option, if they engage in career explorations, what are those favorable outcomes they might follow? Determine high priority career options based on their self-efficacy, their outcome expectation, and their interest areas. And again, here we can pull in other career interventions or assessment tools like strong interest inventory and SCI, skill competence inventory as well. Those are useful tools. And the idea is to explore the career options that the client feel confident in pursuing, the career options that the client think would bring them what they are looking for, what they want, and in the career domain they're interested in. Set specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, SMART goals. I think that's very helpful in career interventions. Gather goal-directed supports and resources, and I particularly like José shared that to involve the significant others and the support systems from families. And we see that a lot when we applied social cognitive career theories. Their friends, their family members usually play an important role in supporting them. Sometimes they all come out as a potential barriers, but they just speak to the importance of that relational context in career interventions. Help the client develop coping strategies for anticipating barriers and obstacles. And finally, I want to highlight sometimes the personality and affective variables could play a role as well in career counseling. And we might need to consult with our colleagues, in related mental health professionals, their input on this. In more recent years, we start to include cultural variables like individualism, collectivism in research, and realize that also play a role in predicting the outcomes specified in the theories. So as we continue to accumulate more evidence, I think the cultural variables will become more and more relevant, especially when we conduct cross-country, cross-cultural research. Okay. All right, so those are just a few highlights from the social cognitive career theories.
Thank you very much, Hayden. I'm just looking at the chat function. If anyone has some quick questions, we'd be glad to review your questions on the chat function. While we're waiting for those, this webinar was organized in a particular way to try to draw out theory, research, practice connections. And often in the field, we've had theory, and then we've had some presentations about practice, and then there's been researchers. What's very exciting to see are the developments that are trying to integrate theory, research, practice connections, and we hope that this webinar has highlighted some of the developments from three perspectives where you can see those strong connections from bodies of work that have been developing over several years. So as we're wrapping up today, I just would invite the panelists to give a statement from your perspective. Tell us why you think theory, research, practice connections are important. So that just a couple of things. So why are those connections important? And what do you think practitioners should pay attention to around those connections? Seth, I'm going to ask you to just give us a few statements, summary statements. And I saw the question in the chat, and I'll post those resources for people. Thank you. Seth, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. I would say for me, as my fellow panelists have talked about, there's so much that goes into career development. And so how is it that you organize that information? And so I do think the complexity of career development requires us to have a sophisticated response to that. And so CIP has chosen, we have, coming together, have developed these different ways, and we're continuing to monitor that and change the theory. We're actually kind of looking at some components of the theory and trying to see if it still holds up. So I would just say that. I would say that it's a complex process, requires us to have a framework in which to organize that information so that we can best serve those that we work with.
Okay. Thank you very much. Jose, over to you.
Absolutely. I think Seth made some excellent points. And although I tend to be more strengths-based in my approach, I'd like us to consider what happens if we don't connect theory, research, and practice. So there are substantial risks if these are not together. So from the research side, we risk research generating lots of publications, etc., but that are not actually relevant to people in everyday life and practitioners who work with them. And on the flip side, if we don't connect research and practice and use research to inform our practice, then how do we know that what we are doing is actually helpful to the clients? How do we know that there are not better ways? How do we even explain in a coherent way what we are doing with the clients? And theory helps to inform those explanations.
Thank you very much, Jose. And then I'm going to go over to you for last words here on the theory, research, practice, connections?
I see myself as a researcher in the applied areas. So, I was very excited to doing research that connect theory and practice. We also train psychologists and counselors here. It's always very nice to demonstrate to the student that what's the practical utility of this research. Not just doing research, but the practical. That's the key word. Is to make our research relevant to practice. And the way I see research actually connect theory and practice. More often than not, we rely on our clinical wisdom, but wouldn't it be nice to have empirical evidence, cross-sectional, longitudinal intervention study like my colleagues are sharing here to demonstrate that the theory actually connect to practice, and this is our empirical body of literature, quantitative, qualitative, to show those evidence. I think they would just strengthen not only our training, but also the value of the work that we're doing with the clients. We rarely cite empirical evidence in our clinical work, but sometimes I find it helpful to even say to the client that, well, we have done quite a bit of research and we know this could be helpful for people who struggle with these career issues. And we are the experts in considered expert in the room. I think that often increase the client's confidence in the intervention that we're pursuing together with them. So I see research is really bound those three together, and when they are bound together, I think that's when we're most effective.
Thank you very much. I'm Ben. Our time is coming to a close here. I want to say thank you very much to the panelists and for your impressive work in the field. And one of the things that that struck me is we have heard from 3 panelists today who live what they talk about. They have been involved in theory, research, and practice in their professional careers, and their insights come from many different points of view. So thank you so much for offering highlights, snapshots of research, and suggestions for practitioners. I want to say also thank you to NCDA and IAVG as the host organizations for sponsoring this webinar. And thank you to all of the participants who took the time out of your day to join us. I hope that you've enjoyed our panel presentation, 3 perspectives on theory, research, practice, connections. Goodbye, everyone.